All right, we're pleased to be joined by Jim Hess, head baseball coach at Union Local. Coach, it's a pleasure to have you on. We're very appreciative that you come to Caddis and take the time out of your evening. I know it's a very busy time of year for you, right in the middle of the season. I guess with that, where do you guys sit right now as far as your team? I know you guys are kind of in the mix for that OVAC race, which is going on, a pretty big deal, and everything else. As a coach, I'd imagine you lay out goals for your team before the season. I guess, where do you see your guys right now as we sit in the middle of the season?
Well, you know what, Drake, thanks for having me. Number one, you guys do a great job. We do. We lay our goals out beginning of each and every year. This is my fourth year as head baseball coach. Been coaching basketball and football at Union Local for many years. So the OVAC is, that's one of our big goals, one of our number one goals. The class that we're in right now, it's tough. It's a dog eat dog world. And as of last Sunday, we were sitting fourth in the OVAC, behind the likes of Indian Creek, Harrison Central, and Edison. Yeah. With Cambridge, Lindsley right on our tails. So, and we're young, and I told our guys, we're starting, I think, 2 seniors right now. We've got a junior or 2, and the rest are sophomores and freshmen. Okay. So, I told them beginning of the year, guys, I said, yeah, we're young. Now it's game 12, game 13. Mm-hmm. We're not young anymore. We
weathered kind of a little bit.
Yes, got to grow up. We got to go. So, yeah, our goals are still in front of us right now.
Do you think with a young team, do you find it difficult, I guess, to communicate things like that with your group? Like, okay, guys, because you and your staff are looking at, it's Tuesday night, it's after a game, and you're in the office, you're looking at, okay, we really need to win X amount of games to stay in the race, whatever. How much of that do you communicate with your team? Because being a little bit younger, that might get in their minds, just all of that kind of stuff. How does that factor in your communication with your staff and your guys?
That's a great question. Our staff, which includes 2 of my sons, so our meetings never stop. We're at home, we're at dinner, we're at breakfast, we're talking baseball. And then that's a big question is how much do we put on these young guys? And, we've got some good kids. They work hard, but, same sense, I don't want to put too much pressure on them. Sure. So, we try and take it right to that level of, hey, guys, this is a big game tonight, or this is a big week. And, we preach trying to go 1-0, just go 1-0 every night. And so that's a great question. I'll be honest, I'm still trying to figure that out, how to answer that.
As far as going 1-0, I guess we've asked football coaches this, we've asked basketball coaches this. What is, in your opinion, the most important thing that goes into winning a high school baseball game in this area? What is the key to going 1-0? It could be pitching, it could be depth, it could be how experienced your guys are, whatever it is. What do you think is most important for your guys to go 1-0 on any given night?
Looking at our opponent, we play in the Buckeye 8. We play in the OVAC. There's no slouches there. Sure. So, we kind of go from night to night with the young guys that we have. Okay, do we try and get our best defensive team on the field? Do we try and go offense? Mm-hmm. A combination of. Our lineups have mixed and matched this year quite often, more so than the last couple of years, which has been a good thing. We just got guys fighting for positions and fighting for spots. And, I think it's game to game. Yeah. It's game to game when we make those decisions. Sometimes I make the right decision and sometimes I don't.
Right. But whether you make the right one or not, I mean, you're pouring so much into that. What's interesting to me for a baseball coach is the amount of preparation that you would do, because it's such a loaded schedule. We talked with another coach who was maybe not a big fan of how compressed the schedule is and how often you guys play and everything. And so it's very quick turnarounds. It's probably late nights for guys like you. And you're thinking about, okay, who are we? What's our lineup look like? Who are we throwing? Things like that. And so, how much goes into it, and what do those conversations or those thoughts look like as far as, very quick turnarounds and things of that nature?
You're right. There's so many things that go into it. how our arms are, where we stand, the weather,
Yeah.
trying to play the weather game, who do we throw tonight? Where do we go here? So there are a lot of late nights,
Yeah.
you get the games over with 7:30. You got an hour and a half worth of field work to get it ready for the next day.
Yeah.
And then head to the office and sit up there and say, okay, did our what we set up for tonight, did it work?
Yeah.
Did our pitching go as planned? Okay, no, it didn't. So now we got to now.
Right.
If that was a Monday, now we've got to regroup and figure out how to go Tuesday through Friday or Tuesday through Saturday. So yeah, a lot of late nights in the office.
Well, I mean, 4 years into coaching, it seems as though, you would think maybe a year or two would teach you kind of the rhythm that you have to have as far as what guys you're throwing on what nights and things like that. But I also think in certain aspects, I mean, there's a wrench that's thrown into that thing all the time. You might think that you have the perfect plan for a given week. You've got a couple big games, things like that. But, your pitcher gets hit in the arm, whatever. Something happens, and now your lineup in that regard is thrown into a blender, and you have to think of something different. I mean, I guess you think you have a plan, but your plan doesn't always work out. What goes into that? I mean, you have to adjust on the fly a lot, I guess.
You just took the words out of my mouth. A lot of it is on the fly, because, that first inning, second inning, something goes south. Kid doesn't have it that night,
Right.
Not throwing strikes. And then, not only does it mess the plane up for that night, then most times, more than not, it affects the next night and the next night and possibly the next night after that. That's the hard part.
With as important as pitching is in the game of baseball, I think, those guys are like the quarterback of your baseball team, basically.
Yep, 100%.
And there's a lot of mental aspect that goes into that. And I think some guys might adapt to a certain level of pressure. Other guys might not be able to handle that kind of pressure so well. I mean, what goes into figuring out, okay, this is our guy. We know he's our guy, but maybe he's not so, he doesn't respond super well to this type of coaching or that type of coaching. What goes into, because we talk all the time about throwing strikes. You have to throw strikes. But if your guy's off that night, he's off that night. He's like a shooter. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what goes into the psychology, I guess, of coaching your guys pitching?
That's a good point because, not every kid's the same. Not every pitcher is the same. We've got we've got a senior that pitches, we've got a couple juniors, and then, we've got a couple freshmen and sophomores that's throwing. So, everybody's different.
Yeah.
And how they react and how they respond. Sometimes we have to be a part-time psychologist as well.
Yeah.
To be able to go out there, call timeout, go out there and speak to these young kids and say, "Hey, calm down. You're okay.
Yeah.
You're okay." And it makes for some trying times
Yeah.
on the mound sometimes.
There's such a balance that you have to strike with that, I guess,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you have to land somewhere between the west coast of the states and the east coast of Asia or whatever, like you're coming from the moon.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but you have to make sure it's right in the right spot because it's like we got to coach him hard at sometimes, but at other times we have to ease up a little bit and let him know like you got this. And I think that's what's really interesting to me is like sometimes you have to be easy as far as coaching. Sometimes you got to be a little tough. You might be batting 500 as far as when you do those types of things, which is very fascinating, especially in the mind of a pitcher.
That's a great point. It's there's certain kids that you can coach one way, and there's other kids that you got to have kid gloves with.
Yeah.
And sometimes I hit that right, sometimes I don't. Probably one of the hardest things I do is I've always been one of those old school type coaches that tries to coach in a new school era. So
Okay.
you got to find a happy medium with that.
Sure.
And some kids take it one way, some kids don't. So we got to find that. Okay, what's going to make this young man go?
Yeah.
What's going to make him really realize, hey, I can do this and I can fight through it. And again, sometimes we find that way, and sometimes we don't.
On May 22nd, you're invited to make a difference as we honor Monroe's legacy in true Masters fashion.
Join us at Caddis Country Club for the Monroe's Masters Memorial Golf Outing in support of Pathways for Inclusion and the Monroe's Mission Scholarship Fund, helping families raising children with disabilities access opportunities in rural communities.
Register your team, become a sponsor, and help us honor Monroe and make an impact in our community.
Visit us at pathwaysforinclusion.org or click the link to sign up or for sponsorship opportunities. We'll see
you on the greens.
One of the things that we ask coaches a lot is kind of for their background. When maybe they played ball in high school, maybe they played ball in college. What was their background as far as where they came from and what their story is that led them to where they are now? And I'm interested in what that looks like for you. You know, what things led you to coaching Union local baseball, 4 years ago?
You know, honestly, it goes way back. You know, my dad played, in the OVBL and in the old, for lack of better terms, the old beer leagues.
Yeah.
And so I was on the baseball field my whole life.
Okay.
And, then I grew up in high school playing for Coach Lee was my baseball coach. I still speak to him weekly. He still calls me once a week.
Yeah.
Tells me the things that he thinks I'm doing right. Tells me the things that I'm doing wrong. And we have a conversation about it. And that goes a long way because, I'm as I look back on the way I coach and the way he coached me,
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of parallel.
Yeah.
And it goes a long way when he calls me and says, "Hey, Hesse, you're doing a good job."
Yeah.
And that makes you go a little bit.
Yeah, it makes you feel good, I'm
It does,
sure.
yeah.
But I think a lot of times coaches, and I think everybody really, there's a level of an ego and a level of pride that goes into anything that you do. If you do anything and you're serious about anything, you have a little bit of pride about yourself. But then when somebody that you've looked up to for so long says you're not doing it the right way, it's like, you want to fight back.
Yeah.
And that's human nature, but you can't always. No. I get told all the time, do this instead, do that instead. But, I want to do it my way because I think my way's right. So, it's just interesting as far as a coach, I think, because they have so much power and control over certain things, like how do you manage that? Because I think all coaches have some level of an ego and certainly a lot of pride, but you can't always display that in your coaching.
I'll take it maybe another step further because, I'm blessed and lucky enough to coach with my two boys.
Yeah.
My oldest son, Dakota, is our pitching coach. He just does so much for our program. It's really amazing what he does. Just brought my youngest one on. He just graduated last year. He's kind of a volunteer, helps with our JV team. He was one of them kids, was a captain, last year. So the kids still look up to him.
Sure.
And, again, like we spoke earlier, we go home at night and our dinner table sometimes almost turns into a fist fight because,
yeah.
I'm hard-headed and they know I am,
yeah.
But they want to tell me, what they thought I did right or wrong and stuff. So, it's the same thing as when Coach Lee calls me and, sometimes it hits home. At first I'm, you don't tell me what I can do or whatever.
I'm the coach.
Yeah, I'm the head coach. But then, as time goes on, I think, hey, he was right.
Sure.
I've got to realize that those guys, my sons and my rest of my coaching staff, who I've got a great staff, they know how I am. They know when they can mess with me a little bit and joke, sure. And there's times when they know just to stay away. So.
You talk about the relationship with your staff. I think that's very interesting, and obviously having your two sons on there is something that's really cool. And correct me if I'm wrong, they both played for you, right?
Actually, one of them, my youngest, Logan, he played for me for 3 years. I took over for Coach Similera, when he stepped away, and my son was a sophomore at that point, and my oldest had graduated.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had brought him on
because Dakota, he would have been class of 23.
My goodness, you're getting my math here. Yeah, so he's 22. Yeah,
Yeah, 22 or 23.
22 or 23.
I just know I had a class with him at school, so
Yeah.
and that's kind of how I ran into him, and he's helping out with the football team as well.
He does. I think his goal is to get into coaching. I think he'd like to be a defensive coordinator in football at some point, and probably maybe a head baseball coach, if not somewhere. So, he's got a lot of coaching aspirations. He's one that, he can look at things, he can look at stats, he can look at film. It's amazing what he can do.
Yeah.
When as a football coach, I coach defensive backs and wide receivers at UL, and he helps with the linebackers in middle school and high school.
Okay, yeah.
And, we start breaking film down, and wow, he's head and shoulders above what I can do.
Sure. Well, and linebacker's one of those tough spots because it's like you want to rush, but you want to drop back. But there's a lot of discipline, I think, that has to come from playing linebacker.
Yeah, and he shows that.
Yeah,
he shows that as a coach and as a baseball coach.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Yeah, and that's got to be a special moment to see somebody, obviously your son that you've known for forever, and coming up as a player and then a coach and everything. You don't want to necessarily coach him as he's coaching because you got to give him a little bit of leeway. Yeah, it's that faith in your staff kind of thing. Yeah. But at the same time, he might be getting chewed out after practice at the dinner table just as much as the players did.
Yeah, we've had our battles. We've had our disagreements. And but we work it out. Mm-hmm. We go back to the film, or we go back to the we sit back down and say, okay, let's time out.
Yeah.
Let's figure out what we're doing. We talk, him and I talk multiple times during the day. There's not a day goes by, on game day especially, that him and I aren't talking. Okay. What are we going to do here? Do we tweak the lineup? We know who we're wanting to pitch. Who's in relief? How many pitches are we going to throw? And so at the end of the day, him and I are almost always on the same page. It may take a little bit of bulwark to get there,
sure,
but we always end up on the same page.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing is ending up on the same page. I think the league that you play in, a lot of those folks are on the same page. You get that impression at least as far as the Buckeye 8, and I guess just talk for a little bit about what it's like competing in the Buckeye 8 and what that league kind of means to the people of Morristown, Bethesda, Flushing, and kind of the UL district. It's a sense of tradition, and it's also tough competition day in and day out.
It is. When we start the year out, we look at the schedule. The Buckeye 8 sends us our schedule, mm-hmm. and that's what it is. And then we schedule everything else around that.
Yeah.
And man, you look at the schedule, and you're starting out with Barnesville on a Monday or a Friday, Monday.
Yeah.
Then it gets better yet. Then you go to Cambridge for a Wednesday, Friday. And then, hey, don't stop there. Then you got St. Clairsville for 2 in a row. And then you got Bel Air and, Martins Ferry. Wow. Martins Ferry's just, Coach Reesbeck and I, great friends, until we get between the lines,
sure.
For that game. And it's like, so the Buckeye 8 means a lot. So, when you're looking at the goals, and I'm new, I'm the young guy and the old guy, but I'm the young coach. And when we start looking at the schedules and the goals, it's like, okay, you got the Buckeye 8, you got the OVAC, mm-hmm. And it's like, when you go back to figuring out pitching and things like that, it's like, wow, what's our main goal here? What do we want to win? And it just kind of goes right down the line.
I think one of the things that's interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a little bit of experience coaching other sports as well, football, basketball, whatever. One of the things, we just spoke to the commissioner of the Buckeye 8, Don Cash, and I failed to ask him about the concept of, a lot of times, as a head baseball coach, you probably are aware of this, you think that a lot of decisions are made as far as leagues and conferences at the football level, because that's that's the power of the purse.
That's what feeds everything.
So does it make sense, or I guess just what's your take on, hypothetically, if all other sports were to break away, football, let's say, let's eliminate their paper townships. Let's break away from these leagues, these conferences. You don't get to play a championship game. It doesn't make sense to. You're competing for something at the state level, and so your local athletic leagues would then be more so for your basketball, your baseball, your softball, your swimming, your whatever. I guess what's your take on all of that?
I'm torn. I'm torn with that. I mean, I think the Buckeye 8 is, I had an older gentleman just not too long ago ask me, hey, what do you think about playing in the Buckeye 8? I'm thinking, well, it's a tough schedule, but, really we're going to play them teams anyhow.
Sure.
We're going to play the Martins Ferries. We're going to play the Barnesvilles,
and the St. Clairsvilles, and the Bel Airs.
We're going to play them anyhow. So, along the way, we might as well go ahead and play it for a championship. I think, not that the Buckeye 8's not important because you got them and the OVAC both, but, once you win or lose a couple games in the Buckeye 8, you kind of know where you're.
Now let's shift our focus.
Let's shift our focus to the OVAC, and because it doesn't take long to figure out who's the front runners in the Buckeye 8.
Right.
If you don't win that first game or whatever.
Yep.
And then each game after that is so important for the OVAC standings, and I find myself again I'm the new guy on the block as far as baseball goes, but been coaching different areas forever. But
sure.
Really want to get in that OVAC. I think Union Local deserves that. I think I owe it to Union Local to do everything I can year in and year out to try and get us in that Final Four of the OVAC.
Yeah.
We all love a great deal, and we all love a great deal of variety, and that's what you get with Thomas Auto Centers in St. Clairsville, Ohio. You can trade, buy, or sell with Thomas Auto Centers. Listen, Hometown Huddle, I Got Your Six, and Main Street Message, we're constantly on the road. How do we do it? Thomas Auto Centers. That's who we're driven by. All you got to do is go to thomasautocenters.com or visit their location in St. Clairsville. For more details, see the description of the video or the podcast show notes, and with that, back to the episode.
You guys defeated Barnesville and St. Clairsville this season already, which is, I'm sure, a big accomplishment for you guys, especially Union Local Baseball. You talked about the kind of community aspect. Those are all kind of I-70 schools, and the Buckeye 8 factoring into that. First time in a long time that you guys have beaten both of them in the same season. I imagine that's something that's very special for your program.
Yeah. You know what? It is, to beat Barnesville and St. Clairsville both in the same season. We split with them. I believe we beat St. Clairsville 3-2, and they beat us 4-3 the next game. St. Clairsville, they beat us 9-1, I believe, and then we come back and beat them the next night or 2 nights later. So yeah, that's big for us. But we're still looking at the bigger picture. We don't want to rest on that either. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those guys, Coach Butler and Coach Sleva, they've got a great program at their both schools, and that's where I'm trying to get to. That's where our staff is. I've got a great staff, like we spoke before, and that's what we're trying to get to. Again, I talked about Coach Respect. Him and I talk often. He's got a good program down there. So yeah, it does mean a lot. When we beat Barnesville. I think it was my first or second year. Actually, my youngest son was the winning pitcher.
Okay, yeah.
And I think we beat him 4-1, and it was a tight game. And at the end of the game, my oldest son looked down at me and he said, "Hey, Coach," he said, "you're allowed to smile," and I didn't, I couldn't, I didn't, just let's get to the next one.
Right, sure.
So, but yeah, it's good for the program. Yeah.
Well, and as a coach, you always have to kind of put that, I don't want to say put that face on, but something might be like really good for your program and really cool. But if you're in the midst of a season and you've got a game the next night, you almost have to downplay that in a sense, because it's like, okay, this is great, but next game, let's not get too caught up in the moment of this or whatever. Celebrate it for one night or enjoy it, but it's that next up mentality.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot as a staff. We talk about that a lot, with the kids, post game.
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, enjoy this one. When we beat St. C that night, it was a big win. It was a big win, but I said enjoy the bus ride home.
Yeah.
But then we're back to work tomorrow and turn the page.
Sure.
The same as I tell them, when we get beat. I said, guys, just let's learn from what we did, learn from our mistakes, learn from what we did right, and then turn the page and let's get ready and go again. Because baseball's it's weird. It's a long season as far as it's grueling.
Yeah.
But you blink your eye,
It's a
and
quick
we're
turnaround.
halfway.
Yeah.
And then you blink your eye, and we're getting ready for the sectional drawing. So I said, guys, you got to enjoy the ride because it goes fast.
Sure.
I've got one of my seniors. I've known their family. I babysat his dad, and I said, this is going to go fast, buddy. You got to bring it every night. Enjoy every moment because it's gonna be done and gone before you can blink an eye.
Yeah, and I think like what's interesting about that to me, and part of the reason I bring it up is like being one of few football players who have defeated St. Clairsville at their home field. Like it's something to where that is a really big, like that's probably there's a certain program close to here that's probably their biggest accomplishment, one of the top 5 in program history.
Yeah,
and every time you beat your big rival, you beat a school that's maybe better than you or whatever the case may be. And so you ride that high for a while, but it always happens in the middle of the season. And it's like, how do you get your guys back up from that? I'm curious also, the game that you won against St. Clairsville, I imagine that series was home and home. Where was the win and where was the defeat at for you guys?
Well, actually, we got beat at home.
And you won at
and then we
Memorial
won
Park.
on the road.
That's a tough place to win at, I feel like.
It is a tough place. We jumped out to a pretty good lead. But St. Clairsville, you can't ever count them out. Just like almost everybody else in the valley that we play.
Yeah.
And they battled back, and we held on to win. And we've won a few baseball games this year that I'm not so sure years past we would have won.
Okay.
And even though last year with my son, we had my youngest, we had some seniors, but this group has been resilient, and they're surprising people. They're surprising me sometimes with what they're doing, and we held on. I think we won 9-7, and I said enjoy the ride home, and then back to work tomorrow.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We talked about fields for a second there, and I think what's kind of related to that, you guys got a great park at UL. And a great school and everything. I think everything is really. You walk into that school and you think it's really good as far as infrastructure and things like that. But you guys have had. It seems as though every other year you're hearing about a levy at Union Local, and I'm interested in your take on since the '90s, what has gone right, what has gone wrong, things of that nature as it relates to getting levies passed and things of that nature.
I'll put my other hat on. I'm not only the head baseball coach, I'm the director of maintenance at Union Local, and I've been so for about 3 years now. And what people don't really understand is that they call it the new school, the new high school. Well, now the new high school is almost 30 years old.
Okay, yeah.
So we have roofs that are outdated. We've got HVAC units that are outdated. We've got electrical issues that are outdated. We've got parking lots and roads, entryways to the elementary that are they're 30 years old. And, we're struggling to keep things up and running.
Sure.
We've got multiple HVAC units that are down. And we're trying to figure out, okay, do we spend $5,000 or $6,000? Do we put $5,000 or $6,000 towards a unit that's 30 years old? That once we do that, is it going to last?
Right.
Or do we, bite the bullet at some point and spend the $15,000 to $18,000 per unit, to get new? And what a lot of people don't understand is when we talk about the HVAC unit, it's not like your house or mine.
Yeah.
It's not one unit. There's over 200 HVAC units within our campus. Right. So there's a lot to it. So, we're struggling. We are. And our administration team is trying to do everything they can. We've been having town meetings, board meetings, trying to get the public that have, they've got a lot of questions, and we're trying to get them answered.
I think that's also a product maybe of the fact that you mentioned earlier, you guys are one of the more spread out districts in the area, to where you've got several communities, all small communities, and also spread out. and it may be, in my mind, difficult maybe to get that community buy-in. It's different, I guess, than some other consolidated districts around the area, to where they can all still, I guess, have a village that they're centered around. But Morristown's not that much bigger than Bethesda, which is not that much bigger than Belmont, or whatever the case is, right? Like, so you have all of that. That's interesting as well, as far as, you know, the communities that you guys are serving.
You know, you're 100% right. You know, I just had a conversation yesterday with a good friend of mine, gentleman that I've coached with for years at the travel baseball level, and he's from Shadyside, and we had that conversation. You know, the town of Shadyside, it's a tight knit community. You know, they're all close right
and they
there.
love the Tigers down there.
And they do, and that's what Shane said. You know, it seemed like it's easier for them, you know, to pass those type of things because they are all in the same vicinity.
Sure.
And I don't want to shortchange our community by no means, because we've got a lot of good people in our community, you know, that want to see our school succeed.
Yeah, they're supportive.
You know, they're supportive. But because we are so spread out, you know, maybe that does have something to do with it.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't know if, like, and I don't even know if we want to, like, talk about this necessarily, but you guys have been on the receiving end of donations, I want to say, in the past. And I think about things like, correct me if I'm wrong, and if I am, we'll probably cut it out, but
yeah.
Is there a jet, like an actual jet coming to the school? So, like, in my mind, people may see that and think, why vote for X, Y, and Z when the donations are coming from X, Y, and Z? And why are the donations going towards an airplane to put out front as opposed to the HVAC units that you talked about?
No, listen, that's a great question, and I answer this often. And the donations that are coming in, it's not like it's coming into the school and the school has decided to buy a jet.
Sure.
So this is a community group. You know, they put together a committee, and they wanted to raise the money to put a jet in our front yard.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So it's not, you know, it's
No, it's not like they were handed
school.
X amount of dollars and then they decided that's what they were going to do with it.
Exactly. So you know, this committee went together. They raised the money. They got the jet. They're proud alumnus of UL,
For
just
sure.
like we spoke.
For sure.
And they wanted to do something to commemorate Union Local. I'm not sure what the best term is, you know, but they wanted to put this jet, which it's pretty amazing what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It's like you really need every single sock that you own has a hole in it. You really need socks this Christmas, but you get the best T-shirt under the tree. Like,
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and
it's out of your control.
I answer it continuously, and I know the rest of our administration team answers it, you know, often. You know, guys, you know, Union Local is not spending Union Local dollars. They're not spending any tax dollars, you know, to put that jet up there.
Right.
You know, that's the group that got together. They wanted this jet.
Yeah.
So
And I guess where my mind goes on that, and I already said this in a way, but it's like maybe there are some folks who just optically, like, the logic behind all of that makes perfect sense. It makes sense to me, it makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Optically, though, it might not make a ton of sense. And that's like, if you're getting X amount of dollars to put a plane in the front yard, why would I vote for X? You know what I mean? Because it's all tax based and it's things like that. It's something that kind of plays into the mind and the psychology of the voter.
You're 100% correct. It does, and there's a lot of voters out there that, you know, although we've tried to be transparent. You know, Mr. Shuttler, you know, our superintendent, you know, has tried to explain that to folks at the town halls, the board meetings. You know, I walk into the coffee shop to get a coffee. And
Which coffee shop, by the way, are you going to?
Well, when I say coffee shop, I'm a gas station guy.
Okay.
I may stop at the
Belmont,
Belmont.
yeah.
Belmont Market takes good care of me.
They've got great ice cream, too, right?
Yeah, I pump my gas at the exact same pump every day. I get coffee there. You know, but I'll still get a question from, you know, one of the gals or guys behind the counter. Hey, you know, you got to pass that. Why don't you just spend the money that you're spending on that jet?
Yep.
And I have to explain it.
Yep.
You know, I appreciate your thoughts, but that's not what's going on.
Yeah, different page.
Yeah, I have to explain it.
Spring is on the horizon, and with that comes spring cleaning. But why do the cleaning yourself when you can call Elite Mobile Power Washing of Cadiz, Ohio, 740-491-1120. Listen, you need your gutters cleaned out, concrete washed off, the side of your house washed off, pool decks, heavy equipment, you name it, they can wash it, and it'll look better than it has ever looked before. Once again, all you got to do is give them a call, 740-491-1120. More details in the description of the video or the podcast show notes. And with that, back to the show.
One other thing that we kind of talked about briefly beforehand was travel ball and the things like that. And I know some coaches say, you know, there are different things that affect the mindset of younger players, things of that nature. You know, I'm a high school sports guy by nature, and so in my opinion, which may not be correct, but you know, I think I think your high school athletic career should revolve around your high school and the team that you're playing for in high school. Yeah. And then you see travel ball, and then you get into all these other things, and I'm just interested in what your take is on all of that. And then you have a disparity potentially in what you're being coached, how you're being coached, those types of things. And it's just so much different necessarily, I think, especially with baseball, than it is with other sports. You don't have travel football. You have a little bit of travel basketball here and there, but baseball, it's so huge.
Yeah, it is. You know, as we spoke before the show started, you know, listen, travel baseball is a great thing. It's huge. You know, the kids get a lot of games as long as it's the right programs.
Right.
You know, I spent last July 4th weekend, like I always do, at the baseball field. You know, I had 5 or 6 kids playing for either a Legion team, a travel team, or whatever. And, you know, so my wife and I, she's a baseball nut as well. So we spent the whole 4th of July weekend at the baseball field. You know, we were over here at Sally Buffalo watching one of our freshmen play, and we were just everywhere watching. Yeah. You know, travel baseball is really good to the kids. They get a lot of exposure, you know, whatever you want to think about that. But they get a lot of games, and as long as the travel program is the right one, they get coached well. Mm-hmm. The downfall, unfortunately, of travel baseball, it doesn't make our lives as head coaches very easy. You know, and I've had this conversation with coaches, you know, throughout the Valley. You know, we get to high school baseball, and these guys are freshmen, and they look at me and say, "What do you mean I'm not in the lineup?"
Yeah.
You know, what do you mean I'm not whatever? And, you know, the travel baseball, for as many perks as it has and as good as it is, it's a downfall too, because it's kind of a false hope for these guys. Sure. I don't know if that's the right word.
But sure, yeah.
You know, because they think, they know when they roll into the baseball field that they're probably hitting the same spot in the lineup, and they're probably playing the same position. Yeah. And they're going to pitch, or they're going to catch, or whatever it is. You know, by the time they get to us as high school coaches, that goes away.
Well, and you don't have that, I don't think, with other sports as much as you do baseball. Like, you couldn't imagine a freshman walking onto the football field and thinking that they deserve to start or whatever. And sometimes there is politics involved. Sometimes it's seniority, whatever it is. But, like, not often is the freshman more talented than the senior or the junior.
You know, I think the kids in the travel baseball, they're programmed that way, you know, because they're hearing, you know, from the time they're young fellas up through how good they are, and they should be playing, and then they are up until that, you know.
You got to be at that point, you're the big fish in a small pond. And like anything in life, you have to learn how to migrate to being that small fish in a big pond.
You know, that's the conversation I have. I always have an incoming freshman day, and you know, we bring the freshmen in and do it upright for them, and show them what our locker room's about, and how we handle ourselves and things like that, and I try and have that conversation. Okay, guys, you have to trust the process here. Yeah, you know, we do have a process, and we're trying. You know, we want to make sure that, you know, everybody's getting the reps that are needed. You know, each player is evaluated. You know, we evaluate each player almost every single practice night. Daily. You know, we try and take notes. You know, we have on every young man that comes through our program, and that helps us. Hopefully, that helps us make the right decision. And when we decide, okay, these guys, day one, this is our starting lineup.
Yeah. So what all that sounds like to me is culture. And as a coach of anything at the high school level, I think culture is so important. So other than those things, I mean, you're preaching to your freshmen those kinds of things, but to your whole group, I guess, what are the core values, I guess, of your program that you're teaching those guys that, may relate to baseball? I mean, they should relate to baseball, but they also relate to a lot of other things outside of baseball. What are the kind of the core things that you guys are teaching your players from a culture standpoint?
I've been lucky enough to coach with Coach Bernie Thompson, our head football coach.
Yeah.
He is a big culture guy. Coach Zach Delman.
I talked to him.
Yeah, I was a JV basketball coach for many years for Zach. Those guys are, we're all three kind of alike when it comes to what we're trying to do with our young athletes.
Yeah.
And that's not just to win every baseball game or, whatever. It's to try and make sure they come out, their grades are up, they're respectful,
Sure.
They do things. We just got off the bus the other night, and one of our bus drivers said, Coach, he said, that's amazing. He said, every kid that got off the bus, they just didn't walk by and say, hey, thanks. They patted me on the shoulder. Thank you, sir, for driving. Thank you. So, so our culture is a big thing. I don't necessarily live by a list of core values.
Okay.
Now, Coach Bernie Thompson does, and it's a great thing. Coach Delman does up to a point with that. Mine's kind of just a combination of everybody.
Don't talk about it, be about it.
Just be about it. That's it. I have conversations with my guys. I bring them into the office and say, hey, what'd you do this weekend? Try and just build a relationship up with each and every one. And that's not just my starters. I try and do that with the freshmen. I try and do that with the guys that are playing I try and do that with everybody just to keep everybody together. And I think it shows in our locker room. We've got it's just an old basement room, but it's a nice locker room. We have fixed it up nice. It's kind of their clubhouse. It's kind of the clubhouse to them like the MLB guys have. And I sit in my office, I'll get up there early and I'll sit in there and just listen to them out there. And it just, the camaraderie is pretty cool amongst, a 14-year-old freshman and an 18-year-old senior.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
What's interesting to me is what those guys. I asked another coach this, and it was kind of an off-the-cuff question, but then I realized this is kind of interesting to hear what different baseball guys have to say about this. But when your guys are in the dugout or whatever, they might be sipping on something, they might be chewing on something. What do you notice? What is that most often that you see them walking in with, whether it's energy drinks or candy or whatever?
It's the seeds. Like most.
Yes.
I mean, my guys are big on that. Drives me nuts. Our dugout, I try and keep spotless.
Yes, for sure.
It's good that they have it. The energy drinks, I try and get the kids to stay away from them.
But they walk in with them.
But they walk. I mean, it's the way of the world. I mean, and they know better than just to come in our dugout with them. Okay. Now, when they come in the locker room, right after school, what can I say? They're going to have them. But when we get between the lines, it's game time. We're in a dugout. Don't have that in our dugout.
Sure, that's interesting because we talked to some other coaches and those guys are. It seems like it's all around the place as they're walking in with these energy drinks. Now I like to hear about the seeds because that's a baseball thing. You're chewing on sunflower seeds, whatever. Yeah. That's interesting, but and at least it's not like. What's it called? It's not M&Ms, but the other one, the fruit.
Oh, like the Skittles.
Yeah, Skittles.
Listen, I've got two sophomores that I'm not so sure that's not the only thing they eat during the day. I walk in the locker room, they got Skittles.
Yeah.
I get down, they're reaching in their back pocket, they got Skittles.
And it's like, okay, thanks, Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, but you guys got such a it's an interesting dynamic as far as community when it comes to not just baseball but high school athletics in general. You've got Morristown there, which is a town, a small town, and then you've also got folks in your district that are from Bethesda and Belmont and Flushing. and everywhere else. What is it? Lloydsville is like kind of an unincorporated.
Lloydsville, Centerville, Holloway, Lafferty, Flushing. Yeah, our community is really spread out. You know, it's not like some of the like a Shady Side or even here in Caddis or Barnesville. You know, we've got 7 or 8 towns that make up our community, and it's spread out quite a bit.
Everybody on their way to practice is driving past one of those blue and yellow county road signs, as opposed to the white and black, state route signs. I guess, what do you sense from the community buy-in from a community perspective, and what Union Local Baseball tries to provide for that area, and and subsequently their support for you guys? I guess, what's your take on all of that?
I think it helps me out. I'm an alumnus from Union Local, graduated in 1985.
You guys are all really proud of that too, by the way. Every UL graduate I've met is very proud to have graduated from Union Local.
100%. I played baseball, football, basketball there. So I know everybody in the community. It's really amazing to. We had a spaghetti dinner today. Mm-hmm. It was a fundraiser for our for a baseball team. So. Our community, I've got guys, it's kind of like you see on TV, I'm coming in, I stop and get a coffee somewhere. Hey, Coach Hess, what good game tonight, or good game last night, makes you feel good. Of course, some of the guys that I've known forever said, hey, how'd you get beat by that team last night? What are you thinking? So it goes both ways. But no, I think our community is really behind baseball at UL. It's behind football, basketball, even though we are spread out. I think we've got a good community backing.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, we're super thankful that you're able to come to Caddis this evening and spend some time in a different community, also passionate. And, we're wishing you guys nothing but the best this season at UL Baseball.
I appreciate that. You guys have been wonderful. I'm lately here, I'm the director of maintenance at Union Local, so I've been on and off TV with DK Wright and everybody else as far as our levy goes and stuff. Yeah, I'm a BSer. I like to talk, but not in a situation like this. So you guys have made it really easy to come on and talk about, and I appreciate that.
All right. Well, Coach, we thank you so much.
Thank you.